this right now. For learning purposes, we have allocated a generous amount of time for Q&A and discussion. So prepare any questions you might have and feel free to drop them in the chat. So I am going to start off with Shuling's presentation, sharing Singapore's experience managing and regulating personalized medical devices, focused on 3D printed medical devices. So let me get her presentation started and share my screen. Sorry, just see. Is everybody able to hear the presentation?
I think not.
Yes, we can see.
You can hear? Okay. But it's supposed to be a recorded slide, so I think the sound cannot be heard.
So the sound is not coming out?
It does not for me. Is the rest able to hear?
We can hear you, Shuling, and we can see the slides.
But the slide is supposedly to be a recorded slide. But I think the slide do not have any sound coming out now, right?
No.
Okay, so maybe I will just try to do it vocally, but I think we need to start from the first page.
Sure, let me do that. All right.
Okay, so this is I'll be sharing on the regulatory guideline on 3D printed medical device. And I have to wait for the slide to go on. Okay, so 3D printing or additive manufacturing is a process of building an object layer by layer based on a digital model. And the types of medical device commonly manufactured using 3D printing will include prosthetic limbs, dental devices, surgical tools, and implantables such as the orthopedics. Singapore is a member of this IMDRF Personalized Medical Device Working Group, and the working group itself has already since published 2 final documents. One is for the definitions, and the other is on the regulatory pathway. And for us, our local guidance is also aligned with what the IMDRF guidance documents is. Locally, our regulatory guideline for 3D printed medical device was published on July 2021, and it serves to address an emerging trend towards personalized treatments in the medical device sector to ensure that there's an appropriate level of regulatory oversight for the individualized medical device, which is being mass produced using 3D printing. And also lastly is harmonization of requirements for the safety, performance, and manufacturing of these products. And I also included a link here on for which you can access our regulatory guideline via this web link. Generally, 3D printed medical device may be categorized into either mass-produced or custom-made. And for the custom-made medical device, the definition is shown here. So it is to be made at the request of a qualified practitioner and in accordance with their specifications regarding the design characteristics or construction of the device. It is intended to be used only in relation to a particular individual and is not adapted from a mass-produced medical device. For mass-produced medical device, typically it is available as in the standard size. Okay, and it could also be a mass-produced device which will be adapted to an individual, such as a dental block which is milled, okay, to be adapted to a particular individual. And lastly, similar to the IMDRF document, we have introduced this new terminology, which is the patient-matched medical device. Next slide. Patient-matched medical device is described as follows. That is a device which is manufactured within a specified design envelope and is typically produced in a batch through a process that is capable of being validated and reproduced. And the device is actually matched to a specific patient's anatomy within the design envelope. The design envelope is further clarified to be referring to various parameters, including the minimum and maximum dimension or size, mechanical performance limits, and etc., which is relevant to a medical device. So all design or specifications of the patient-matched device must remain within these validated parameters of the specified design envelope. Next slide, please. And this is an example of I think I need to go back. Yeah, this is the example of patient-matched medical device, which is a acceptable guide designed to assist a surgeon with pre-operatively planned placement of the acceptable card component of a total hip replacement. So the guide is based upon the CT image of a patient's specific anatomy and the manufacturing process upon which the design of the patient-matched guide is based upon are validated within a certain range of anatomical parameters within the design envelope. And hence, this acceptable guide is a patient-matched medical device. And next slide. For custom-made device, this is the definition which I have also explained earlier in the previous slide. For this, we have provided further clarity to what is meant by the design characteristic or construction. So this is actually further defined as unique design specification necessary to produce custom-made device and which are based on an individual's specific anatomical physiological features and or pathological condition. So they must fulfill all these three criteria for the device to be to fall under a custom-made medical device definition. Next slide, please. An example of a custom-made medical device will be a acceptable cup implant requested by orthopedists in addition to a DICOM compliant scan image. The orthopedist actually sends specific requirements for bridging the areas of the acetabular wound loss in acetabulum reconstruction to a 3D printing implant manufacturer. This will include the thickness, the trajectory of the cup mounting flange, number, type, and positions of the fixation screws. So all these requirements are outside of the manufacturer's validated parameters for the specified design envelope. And hence, it will actually be a custom-made medical device. Next slide, please. To assist our stakeholders to determine whether their device is actually a custom-made device or a mass-produced device which requires product registration, we have come up with this very simple flow chart. So basically, it's based on the definitions, and it will help them to determine whether their device is a custom-made or a mass-produced. Next slide, please. This gives an overview of the regulatory control for the mass-produced medical device and the custom-made medical device. So for both mass-produced and custom-made, dealer license and the post-market obligations will be applicable to the device. However, for the mass-produced medical device, they will be further subject to product registration. I think the slide skipped. Okay, so as with all medical devices, 3D printed devices are classified into different risk classification, from the lowest risk class A to the highest risk class D medical device, based on our risk classification rules in our guidance GN13. The risk classification will depend on the nature of the device and their intended function. So in order to supply mass-produced 3D printed device, the registrant will be required to register Class B, C, and D devices with us, and the product registration requirements will be as per our guidance GN15. Class A device, being the lowest risk, is actually exempted from product registration. The type and amount of technical documents for product registration submission will vary depending on the intended use, the risk classification, and evaluation route of the device. Next slide, please. This lists some of the basic considerations for all 3D printed device. It includes the design, the device validations, labeling, expiration date, and the manufacturing considerations. However, it should be noted that not all considerations described here will be applicable to every device, as this will also be dependent on the additive manufacturing technology, the type of the device, and the material used. Next. Under the design considerations, it could include dimensional specifications, critical features such as the location and thickness of the porous features, and material specification for the starting material use. The type of device validation, such as whether it's mechanical or performance validation, will actually depend on the device type. So it may include things like tensile strength, fatigue, or abrasive wear, and so on. And other considerations will be biocompatibility if the device is in contact or indirect contact with the patient, removal of manufacturing material residues to an acceptable level. Next. For patient-matched medical device, elements of the labeling should include sufficient information to identify or to trace the individual, and the expiration date of the patient-matched device may be driven by the patient imaging date. So it is recommended for the patient to be assessed for potential anatomical changes prior to the procedure or surgery. And lastly is the manufacturing consideration, for which we'll need information on the additive manufacturing method, such as whether it's a SLM, DSLM, etc., and the starting material, additives, or processing agents used during the manufacturing, and all manufacturing activities for the medical device, including the additive manufacturing and post-manufacturing process, should be performed within an ISO 13485 compliant quality management system. And I think I've come to the end of my slides. Okay, thank you, Mugen. Not sure if Appa is in already.
Yes,
good morning,
he seems to have been connected.
Shuling. Good morning, Shuling. Good morning, Mugant. My apologies for the delay in joining. I've been struggling for the past 30 minutes to connect via the Zoom link, but it didn't work. So I've joined from my mobile phone. So my apologies for the poor quality video.
Not an issue, Par. Thank you very much for joining us and going through all that trouble. So Shuling has just presented on Singapore's experience regulating personalized medical devices, specifically 3D printed medical devices. And if you're ready, we'll go on to your presentation. And I understand there's some introductory material on PMDs as well. Yeah. So would you like to share screen or?
I don't think.
Okay, let me do that for you then.
My screen,
yeah.
Yeah. I'm dialing in from my phone, but I've got my slides on my work computer, so it's a bit of a.
All right, let me do that
challenge for me.
Not an issue.
I have to ask to request you to move the slides at appropriate time as well, if that's okay.
Sure. And are you able to see my slides? My
yes,
screen?
I'm
okay.
able to see the slide. Yep.
Okay, great. Anytime you're ready.
Thank you, Mugan. And good morning, Mugan, Sandra, and colleagues from Indonesia Ministry of Health. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you regarding definitions and regulatory pathways for personalized medical devices. My name is Upahar Chamoli, and I'm the team lead for engineering in the Medical Devices Authorization branch at the Therapeutic Goods Administration Australia. In my team, we routinely do engineering component assessment for high-risk medical devices, such as heart valves and orthopedic implants, where the manufacturers may have submitted an application for conformity assessment. We have started seeing some personalized medical devices applications, and they present some unique challenges to assessors in terms of assessment, particularly with patient-matched medical devices, where there's heterogeneity in the device design and manufacture. The engineering team in the Medical Devices Authorization branch is also involved in a number of reforms projects related to refinement of Australian regulations for medical devices, as well as our work with international colleagues through IMDRF working groups. So I've been representing the TGA on the IMDRF Personalized Medical Devices Working Group since 2020. And I'm very pleased to be talking at this forum with my IMDRF working group counterpart from Singapore, Shuling, and my colleague from TGA, Beck Bateson. Next slide, please. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today, which is the Darug people for city of Parramatta, Sydney, where I'm currently working from. And I would like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to extend the same acknowledgement and respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us today in this webinar. Next slide, please. So the International Medical Devices Regulators Forum Personalized Medical Devices Working Group it comprises of representatives from regulatory authorities in various IMDRF jurisdictions, as well as observers from regional harmonization initiatives, such as Global Harmonization Working Party, and we also have observers from Argentina in the PMD working group. The PMD working group is currently chaired by Australia, by Tracy Duffy. The focus of the working group is on developing technical guidance documents in relation to personalized medical devices. And the group has been meeting regularly over the past couple of years, including during the COVID period through teleconferencing meetings to progress its work. So the group has published a few documents over the past 5 years, which are publicly available on IMDRF website. In today's presentation, I'll be mostly talking about the foundational document or the seminal document that the group published in 2018 on the definitions of personalized medical devices. And some of the recommendations presented in these documents have been adopted across various IMDRF jurisdictions, including here in Australia. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of having these guidance documents published by an international working group dedicated to personalized medical devices? Well, the ultimate objective of IMDRF is to support global convergence on the regulation of medical devices so that the burden around gaining regulatory compliance is reduced for manufacturers and other stakeholders. and also for the ultimate benefit of access of these devices to patients. The guidance documents developed by PMD working group address an emerging trend where we're seeing an increased use of personalized medical devices in healthcare. Depending on which report you accept, the global personalized medical devices market in 2021, it was quite enormous. In fact, according to one report, it was estimated to be around 500 billion US dollars in 2021 alone, and is expected to grow at a rate of 6 to 7% over the next 7 or 8 years. Here in Australia, since the introduction of the PMD regulatory reforms in 2021, the PMD team at the TGA has identified that there could be potentially up to 50,000 stakeholders impacted by the reform. So it's quite a big chunk of stakeholders that we are talking about on a global scale as well as on a local scale. The working group, the PMD working group really brings a wide range of experience and expertise, which is very useful in developing recommendations for stakeholders which are fit for purpose. The ideas presented in the guidance document that the IMDRF PMD working group publishes, they are recommendations only, and it is up to each member jurisdiction on how these recommendations are adopted in their respective regulatory framework. So, for example, in the Australian context, a lot of these recommendations have been adopted in framework on personalized medical devices. The recommendations presented in these documents, if they're adopted in the jurisdictional regulatory framework, will provide a basis for consistent and transparent requirements across multiple jurisdictions to ensure patient safety as well as quicker access to these devices by patients. Next slide, please. So the first guidance document that the working group published was in 2018, and this was the definitions for PMD, or the N49 document. And most of my talk today will focus on the N49 document. So the document presented definitions for personalized medical devices and mass-produced medical devices. It further divided personalized medical devices into 3 distinct categories: custom-made medical device, patient-matched medical device, and adaptable medical devices. Relevant examples were also provided in the document to further clarify the definitions. Now, this has been a seminal document on PMD concepts, and the definitions that have been presented in N49, they have been adopted in the medical device regulations in many countries, including here in Australia. The document is publicly available on IMDRF website, and I would encourage meeting participants to have a read of this document if they haven't already. Next slide, please. Now, further building on the N49 document, the working group published another document in 2020, the N58 document, that basically presented general regulatory consideration for each category of personalized medical device. The N58 document also presented a new concept called medical device production system, and associated regulatory consideration for MDPS. For MDPS is a unique concept whereby a manufacturer is able to package an entire system of raw materials, software, equipment, and operating instruction, and supply the entire package to a healthcare facility for the production of a specific type of medical device for treating patients at that facility. So this was the first time this concept was introduced in the IMDRF document. But it is worthwhile noting at this stage that the N58 is currently undergoing revision. And the reason for that is that during COVID, regulators witnessed point of care manufacturing of devices, not only PMDs, but also regular medical devices, and accessories in order to meet the demands that were put on the healthcare system and address supply chain disruptions. So the PMD working group wrote a position paper to the IMDRF Management Committee in 2022, requesting for permission to revise the N58 document to expand its scope beyond personalized medical devices, but particularly in the point of care manufacturing space. So the N58 document, the revisions were prepared for the N58 document, and the management committee approved those revisions for public consultation last year. The public consultation is now closed, and the working group is currently reviewing all the feedback received on the N58 document. Hopefully, you'll be in a position to progress that work and submit the final version of the N58 document to the management committee for consideration. Another document that the working group has been working on for the last 18 or 20 months is the PMD production validation document. And this is a technical document that provides consideration for validation of patient-matched medical devices. One of the challenges that stakeholders have expressed with patient-matched medical devices is that because of heterogeneity in the device design and production, it is difficult to establish or difficult to use regular validation approaches for validation of the specified design envelope. So the production validation document, the N74, specifically talks about some of the approaches that the manufacturers could adopt for validating the specified design envelope for patient-matched medical devices. Now, both the N58 revisions and the N74 document, they're not in their final shape yet. The working group is currently addressing the feedback received on the two documents during public consultation last year. But if the meeting participants would like to read the document that were published for public consultation to understand the PMD working group thinking on these devices, the documents are still available on IMDRF website. Next slide, please. So the first thing to understand with the definition of personalized medical devices is how exactly are these devices different from mass-produced devices? Now, personalized medical devices are, the term is used to describe devices that are intended for a particular patient. So they are designed and manufactured to meet the requirement of a specific individual, and that individual could be a patient or a healthcare practitioner. Mass-produced devices, on the other hand, are devices that are not designed for a particular individual, but they're typically produced in a continuous production run or homogeneous batch. A homogeneous batch of devices or components is typically produced in the same manner from the same raw materials, using the same equipment, typically on the same day and by the same team of people as well. The thing that differentiates the two category of devices is that for mass-produced devices, no specific patient characteristics are required for their design and manufacture, other than the general characteristics of the target population that the mass-produced devices are intended for. Next slide, please. So custom-made medical device is a type of personalized medical device which is intended for the sole use of a particular individual. Now, that particular individual could be a patient or a healthcare professional. The unique aspect of custom-made medical device is that these devices can only be requested by an authorized healthcare professional who would give specific instructions for the design characteristics of these devices, and the responsibility for the design of the device would be with the authorized healthcare professional. These devices are intended to address specific anatomical and physiological or pathological condition of an individual for whom they are intended. Now, I would like to draw your attention to note 2 in the definition of custom-made medical device. So note 2 basically says that a custom-made medical device is intended for a case where an individual need cannot be met or cannot be met to an appropriate level of performance by an alternate device available on the market. Now, our interpretation of the CMMD definition is that with the request that the healthcare professional makes, there must be an assessment of the current options available in the market for the device, and the healthcare professional must provide a justification why the individual's need cannot be met or cannot be met to an appropriate level with the currently available options in the market. In our understanding, such an assessment cannot be made objectively by the CMMD manufacturer because of conflict of interest and the relevant clinical expertise requirement. Next slide, please. So an example of a custom-made medical device based on the definition, these devices are going to be rare and unique devices that should be supplied only in exceptional circumstances. One such example of a CMMD is a case presented here. This example has been taken from Lancet Digital Health. The example represents severe kyphotic deformity in the thoracic spine of a patient due to neurofibromatosis. The treating surgeon in this particular case established that no device currently available on the market is sufficient to address the health issues presented. And they provided very specific design characteristics to the CMMD manufacturer, including the length and the trajectory of the implant, the porous protrusion for bone growth, and etc. Manufacturer used the CT scan data supplied by the healthcare professional with their request, and they did routine computational testing to establish that the device would meet performance standard. They also conducted cadaveric trial to assess implantation procedures for this device. So this is clearly a unique case where the healthcare professional had very specific requirements, and those requirements for the patient couldn't be met using other devices available on the market. Next slide, please. The next category of personalized medical devices is the patient-matched medical device. And a patient-matched medical device is basically a device which is produced within a specified design envelope to match the anatomical and physiological features of a particular individual or pathological condition of a particular individual. The specified design envelope is a salient feature of patient-matched medical devices, and I'm going to talk more about it in the next slide. A patient-matched medical device manufacturer is completely responsible for the design and the production of the device, even if the design is developed in consultation with the healthcare professional. So that is one aspect where PMMDs are clearly distinct from custom-made medical device. An important distinction between PMMDs and a custom-made medical device is that the design and the manufacturing processes used are capable of being validated, verified, and reproduced, which essentially means that the manufacturer is able to consistently produce the same quality of the device using the set of materials, equipment, internal procedures, and processes. So if a manufacturer is probably supplying tens and hundreds of devices, it is likely that they have established procedures for making those devices, even if the device requires very clear patient characteristics. One thing that separates patient-matched medical device from their mass-produced devices is the fact that design of a patient-matched medical device cannot be finalized until patient characteristics are available. And this is particularly challenging from an assessment perspective, because what we're basically looking at is a set of parameters within which an infinite number of devices can be produced. Next slide, please. So a salient feature of patient-matched medical device definition is presented in the N49 IMDRF document is the concept of specified design envelope. Now, according to the definition, a specified design envelope means minimum and maximum dimensions, performance limits, and other relevant factors that characterize PMMD for production purposes. A specified design envelope may be based on a standard device template as well. Now, the PMD working group has been discussing this concept of specified design envelope quite a lot in the N74 document, and there are further technical considerations presented in the document. Now, our interpretation of the definition of specified design envelope is that all the parameters that a manufacturer is able to change in order to meet the specific requirements of a particular individual, they must be clearly established within the specified design envelope. The limits on those parameters must be clearly established as well. And if a device is produced outside of those approved limits, then the safety and performance of the device cannot be guaranteed. So the working group has been discussing different categories of parameters that could be included within the specified design envelope. And this is the broad schema that has been included in the IMDRF N74 document. So broadly, the specified design envelope and the parameters can be divided into 6 categories. Structural parameters, here the dimensional aspects such as length and thickness and the internal geometries could be captured, and their limits could be clearly established. The second category is the material parameters, where different materials that are used in device construction, they could be captured, and their limits could be established as well. Manufacturing parameters, there may be differences in manufacturing processes or post-processing approaches used by the manufacturer, and all those variations should be clearly captured under manufacturing parameters. Performance parameters, parameters related to performance of a device are captured here. For example, a manufacturer may produce different variants of a spinal device, and those different variants could be targeted to patients with different bone quality, and therefore those variants may have different stiffness characteristics. So any variations in the performance of the devices produced within the specified design envelope, they must be clearly captured in performance parameters. There are clinical environment parameters that could vary. So, for example, within the same design envelope, manufacturer could produce devices that are meant for use in different clinical environments. For example, maxillofacial implants for cranium and mandible, they would have different requirement in terms of testing, in terms of their load-bearing ability. If there are other parameters that are not captured in any of the 5 categories, but they certainly characterize the device for production purpose, then it must be captured in the miscellaneous category. So an example of a patient-matched medical device could be a mandibular plate, which is produced by a 3D printing manufacturer within a specified design envelope. And the specified design envelope in this particular scenario could include things like plate thickness, maximum length of the plate, or maximum area of the plate on the bone surface. Material properties could change from stainless steel to titanium alloy. The number of screw holes could change as well. So there are a number of variations within the specified design envelope that the manufacturer is able to select from once patient characteristics and their requirements are available. Next slide, please. The third category of personalized medical devices is the adaptable medical device. An adaptable medical device definition suggests that it is a mass-produced device and it is adapted, adjusted, assembled, or shaped at the point of care in accordance with manufacturers' validated instructions to suit an individual specific needs. Now, it may appear conflicting that the definition of adaptable medical device suggests that these are mass-produced, but these devices are still personalized medical devices. But it is worthwhile remembering that there is a final manufacturing step included in the adaptable medical device, and that manufacturing step is at the point of care. The adaptation is completed by the healthcare professional or the user at the point of care to ensure that the devices are truly personalized and they are adapted to meet the requirements of a specific individual. An example of an adaptable medical device would be polymeric cranial implant that may be supplied as high-density polyethylene sheets, which comes in various shapes and forms. And these sheets are often cut to shape to cover the deformity intraoperatively during the procedure by the surgeon, according to the validated instructions for adaptation. And it is these validated instructions for adaptation that often forms a huge focus in our engineering assessment. We are looking for usability assessment and human factors validation assessment for the instructions supplied with these devices. Next slide, please. So what is the PMD working group working on at the moment? The public consultation on the two IMDRF documents, the N58 PMD regulatory pathways and the PMD production validation document is now closed. We have received a lot of feedback from stakeholders from across the world. The working group is currently going through that feedback and there are deep dive sessions planned for this week where the working group will discuss individual feedback items in order to develop the revised versions of these documents. Ultimately, the goal is to progress these documents to the IMDRF Management Committee for their consideration at the March meeting. Following the endorsement, the documents will hopefully be published in their final form on the IMDRF website. But until these documents are published in their final version, the versions that were published for public consultation last year, they're still available on the website. Next slide, please. So I would like to thank you again for your attention today, and my apologies for the disruptions at the beginning. I was struggling with technology and didn't let me join the meeting at the beginning. I would also like to thank the Personalized Medical Devices team at the TGA for a lot of this work that I've presented today, and particularly my colleague Rebecca Bateson, who is the project lead on the PMD project at TGA and has provided a lot of valuable input on this presentation, as well as for the MDRF working group activities. If you'd like to contact the TGA on any PMD related matters, we are certainly happy to share our experience. Please write to personalizeddevices@health.gov.au and we'll do the best we can to help. Thank you. Over to you, Mugand.
Right, thank you very much, Upar and Shuling as well. So we've come to the discussion section of our session today, and we already have a question. So hang on, let me put Shuling in the spotlight here as well. And okay, so let's start with the first question in the chat, and then we'll move on to any other questions we might get. And this one is for Shuling, and this is from Zahra. She says, so in Singapore, personalized medical devices do not need to be registered. And so she's asking, how would one supervise personalized medical devices, or how does HSA supervised personal medical devices, and what are some of the requirements that manufacturers of personalized medical devices have to meet?
Personalized medical device do require product registration, but that is the category for the mass produced. We have also the adaptable and also the patient matched medical device. So these two categories of device, which is under the mass produced categories, do require product registration for the high risk class, as a class B, C, and D. Only the custom made do not require product registration. All right.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So in personalized medical device, there are some variation to it. One of the personal medical device is customized medical device, yeah, and the other is what you said before, adaptable medical device, and one other, what is it?
Okay, so for personalized medical device, there is the adaptables and also the patient matched medical device. Okay, these two categories, as shared in my slide, they fall under the mass produced. And so for these two categories, we would require product registration. All right.
Okay.
Then another category of personalized medical device, which is the custom made medical device. Okay, so for that, because it is so specific to it's not under the mass produced category. So for those type of device, it is do not require product registration. But all these three categories is under personalized medical device, similar to the INDRF documents.
Okay, that's clear for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, this is Sandra, and if I may, I would like to go a little further on Sarah's question, and it has to do with lead time for the personalized medical devices that do require an approval from the health authority in Singapore. How do you manage to be sufficiently responsive time-wise to these very specific needs when there is a registration process involved?
Okay, so I guess you are referring to the patient matched medical device, which requires product registration. So for patient matched medical device, they are typically produced within a specified design envelope. So during the product registration, they should give us information on that specified design envelope. So for instance, there may be they vary the size, okay, from 1 to 10. Okay, so for the device validation wise, then that it should be performed based on the worst case in terms of that particular size range. So all the review and the submission will consider the entire range of the device within the design envelopes. And for the purpose of the patient matching, it has to be done within that design envelopes. Does that address your question?
Yes, certainly it does. And for all the others, the personalized ones that do not require a registration, are they required? I mean, are the manufacturers required for a notification, or is there a specific process that they have to follow?
Locally for Singapore, custom-made device, they will need to notify us of the devices that they are importing and manufacturing. So, so such that we will have some traceability information of the custom-made device that's been manufactured and imported into Singapore.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Upar, while we still have you, is the process similar for Australia as well? And you can share Australia's process with us too.
Oh, thanks, Mugan. Australia introduced a new PMD regulatory framework in February 2021, and the devices that were classified as custom-made prior to the introduction of that framework, some of those devices could meet the new definition of patient-matched medical devices going forward. There is a transitioning arrangement in place until November 2024, where if the manufacturers have notified the TGA that they will be transitioning to patient-matched medical device, they would have to get their conformity assessment evidence before November 2024 and include the devices in the Australian Register for Therapeutic Goods before that period. For custom-made medical devices, they continue to be exempt from registration requirements, but they're not exempt from regulations. So although the devices don't need to be on ARTG for supply, but there are regulatory requirements on CMMD manufacturers as well, such as annual reporting requirements and post-market surveillance and adverse event reporting, so on and so forth.
Great, thank you, helpful. Are there any other questions or comments from the Ministry of Health colleagues?
Yes, please. That's all. Fikri first. Fikri wants to ask some question.
Sure, Fikri, go ahead.
Bazara.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Shirling and Nufar. Just a bit curious. So, if the personalized medical device or patient-matched medical device is exempted from the registration, is there any like specific or different post-market control done to it? Because some of the 3D printer actually have it in the clinical setting. For example, they print it in the hospital or in the clinic. Do TGA or HSA do some inspection to the hospital or the clinic, or what will be the measure there? Thank you.
So I can go first, Shirling. Thank you, Fikri, for your question. Now, at the very onset, I would like to clarify that only custom-made medical devices are currently exempt from registration in Australia. They are exempt from registration in the Australian Register for Therapeutic Goods, but they're not excluded devices. So there are still regulatory obligations for manufacturers in terms of post-market adverse event reporting and advertisement compliance. For patient-matched medical devices, as I previously mentioned, there is a transitioning arrangement in place until November 2024, where manufacturers have to gather appropriate conformity assessment evidence and include their devices or register their devices for supply beyond November 2024. So there are requirements for patient-matched medical device manufacturers similar to other mass-produced medical device manufacturers.
Okay, then for Singapore locally, custom-made device, although they are not subjected to product registration, dealer license will still be applicable. So that is the manufacturer license, importer and wholesaler license, and they are also subjected to post-market obligations like to report any adverse events and few safety corrective actions to us. And when you are referring to the context of the hospitals, okay, which is the point of care, for us locally, they need to be licensed under the PHMC Act, which is basically is another license for the hospitals. So basically for devices which is manufactured within these licensed facilities, we do not have additional or duplicated controls for those devices. So we actually do not require them to have any additional dealer licensing or product registration with us. Yeah, that is our current piece.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right, and it was Zahra, you had a question as well.
Yes, can I ask in Bahasa, please, and interpreter will translate it into English.
Sure, we'll just switch to the English channel for those who need English interpretation.
Yeah. Jadi di Indonesia yang
In Indonesia, what we have met in Indonesia, they made the artificial limbs. They made artificial limbs for patients that need it. these kinds of artificial limbs maker is under. They are not like manufacturer. They are not under manufacture. They are also not under doctors. They are just makers of these artificial limbs. They are helping people for those disabled people. These kind of cases in Indonesia, is it also happening in Singapore or in Australia? What do you think? What does HS is thinking? How to control this thing? Because this artificial limbs is also medical devices. We also need to we also need to concern about the manufacturing of this artificial and also about the about how it is going on in the market. So the makers of this artificial limb is not under. So the artificial.
I somehow didn't get the English version.
The artificial limbs is not under hospital, is not under manufacture, it's just like personal.
Okay, it seems that we are having a problem because at least at my end, I couldn't either, but Mugan could. So I don't know if there is a chance.
Okay, so Zara's connection seems to be bad. Upar and Shuling, were you able to hear the English translation or no?
No.
I wasn't.
Okay, so basically, and
Can I ask interpret? Yeah. No. Oh, sorry. Should I repeat my question?
yeah, sure. And Shuling and Upar and guess that if you're able to, you need to
Ibu
switch to the English channel.
bisa mendengar suara saya, Bu? Okay, I already switched it. And can I repeat my question now?
Yes, sure.
Okay, ya. Baik di Indonesia saat ini yang kami jumpai
recently what we have met
adalah
in Indonesia is the
kaki palsu yang dibuat
prosthetic
oleh
leg that is
pengrajin
made
kaki palsu.
by those personal made.
My apologies for interrupting, but at least it is me that I am not listening to the interpretation to English. I don't know.
Jadi bukan dibuat oleh
Shuling.
pabrik, bukan dibuat oleh pabrik kaki palsu, tapi dibuat oleh pengrajin kaki palsu.
All right, so there seems to be a lot of overlapping conversations, so I'm going to try and make sense of this.
Okay.
Ibu Zahra, let me know if what I get is what I've understood is correct. Yeah. So basically, Ibu Zahra's question was, in Indonesia, there are manufacturers for artificial limbs for disabled people and those who need it. They are manufacturers. They are not doctors. They're not hospitals. They're not licensed clinics. They are simply manufacturers. And she's asking, do these manufacturers of artificial limbs, do they need to be regulated? Are they considered under medical devices? And what is the case and how is this managed in Singapore and Australia? Right, Ibu Zahra, did I get your question correct?
Yes, you're correct, Bukan.
Okay.
Yes, the production made by a craftsman that produce the artificial limb used by handicraft people. They usually under the foundation, not under the hospital or medical device manufacturer.
Okay, so for the artificial limbs, whether it require product registration in Singapore, it will still depends on what categories it falls under. Okay, so say for example, if it is a patient-matched medical device whereby the artificial limb is produced within a design envelope in which the manufacturer has already validated it for, okay, then product registration is required. But then again, for product registration wise, we still depends upon the risk class. So for prosthetic limbs, for example, if it's a class A prosthetic limbs, then because of the low risk, it is a class A device, they only need to notify to us basic information such as the device name, intended use, and manufacturing information on a publicly available database. Okay, so however, if it is not in the context of patient-matched medical device, but rather the prosthetic limb is actually a custom-made device because it is produced outside of that design envelope, whereby or in circumstances whereby there is actually specific design characteristics which is unique to the patient as requested by a doctor. Okay, then the custom-made control will be applicable. That is, product registration is not required, but but the manufacturer will still be subjected to the dealer licensing requirements and the post-market obligations.
Thanks, Shilling, and thanks for the question. Well, I guess whether a product is a medical device or not, or it meets the definition of medical device, it depends on its intended purpose. So to give an example, mouth guard, if it is used in contact sport and a manufacturer doesn't clearly intend it to have a medical purpose, it may not meet the definition of medical device. Whereas in other circumstances, if the manufacturer actually intends that mouth guard to meet a specific clinical, to have a specific clinical purpose, then it could meet the definition of a medical device. So to approach that question, I think the first thing to establish would be whether the product meets the definition of a medical device or not. In Australian context, there are devices such as craniofacial prosthesis, spectacle related or adhesive retained, and where the primary purpose is cosmetic, the devices have been excluded from Therapeutic Goods Act. So those are not regulated by the TGA. Where there is a clear intended purpose, and that intended purpose serves the clinical need, and the device meets the definition of a medical device, then that certainly would be included in the medical device framework. In scenarios where the device meets the medical device definition, the next question to ask would be whether it meets the definition of a custom-made medical device, a patient-matched medical device, or an adaptable medical device. And depending on which category of medical device that would fit in, and then the risk classification would come in, and the risk classification will primarily decide what sort of procedures the manufacturer need to apply to provide appropriate conformity assessment evidence. So that's the approach we normally take here in Australia around some of these devices. But great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Parshaling. Thanks, Zahra. And I think one more element was that if they are not large manufacturers, but SMEs or local craftsmen that are doing these prosthetic limbs, would the regulator or the authority have to expend resources to monitor this production or monitor, say, post-market production for these limbs prosthetic limbs or artificial limbs that are manufactured by this group of people, safe for the community, for the local community. I think that was another element, right? Ibu Zahra, in your question?
Yes. I think it's hard in Indonesia to make the craftsman fulfill the requirement of medical device manufacturer. So if we only make some requirement to report what they have produced and where they distribute the prosthetic limb, is it okay for the first step of us? Yeah. What do you think? Is there any format of reporting personalized medical device in HSA or TGA that can be shared to us?
Well, at least in the Australian regulatory framework for personalized medical devices, the custom-made medical devices which are exempt from registration, the manufacturers still have regulatory obligations. So they are required to submit an annual report to the TGA every year by October, telling TGA the number of devices and the type of devices that were supplied in the previous financial year, any adverse events on those devices, and so on and so forth. The devices are still required to meet essential principles of safety and performance. There are other refinements to the framework that we have introduced since its introduction in February 2021. So for example, if a manufacturer is currently supplying 5 or less devices of a type that meets the definition of patient-matched medical device, they're also exempt from registration. So even if a device doesn't meet the definition of custom-made medical device and the device is patient-matched medical device, but the manufacturer is only supplying 5 or less, they are still exempt from registration requirements. 5 devices in a financial year. As I previously mentioned in my response, it ultimately comes down to what is the intended purpose of the device as claimed by the manufacturer. So the same device could be a simple product, but as soon as the intended purpose makes a particular claim, and the same product could meet the definition of medical device, and there would be obligations associated with making those claims.
So similarly for Singapore locally, as long as they meet the medical device definition. So for instance, if it's a prosthetic limbs for a handicapped, so this would actually fall within our medical device definition. And then for such device, we will still apply the same. It will still depends on whether it is a patient match or it's a custom made. And as shared previously, if it's a custom-made medical device, even if they are SMEs, they will still need to apply for the dealer license, okay, which is like, for instance, the manufacturer's license or the importer license. But then the level of controls still depends on the risk class of the device, okay. So if it's a prosthetic limbs, which is not surgically invasive, then typically it may be a Class A device locally. So for Class A device, the level of requirements is not as high as the other the higher risk class device. So for instance, for the dealer license, they would not be subjected to, we will not require them to have a ISO 13485 certificate when applying for a manufacturer license locally, but we will still need them to declare to us that they are overall compliant with that quality management system, to appropriate quality management system. So the level of regulatory control for low risk class A differs to a higher risk class B, C, and D device. And for patient match device, in that event, if it's a patient match device, then again, what is additional will then be the product registration if we compare across a patient match to custom made. So also I shared previously for it also still depends on the risk class of the device. So again, if it's a class A device, actually they do not need to submit product registration, okay, but rather it's just a entry of a database which we have with regards to basic information such as the device name, intended use, and the manufacturing site information. So all this is for the traceability purpose. Yeah, so I hope I have answered your questions.
Thanks, Shuling. A great point, and very similar to HSA requirements here at TGA as well for fluorous devices, class 1, non-sterile, non-measuring. The process of inclusion in the ARTG is auto-inclusion. Manufacturers simply needs to submit a declaration of conformity, and the requirements are much less compared to other high-risk medical devices.
Great, thanks for Bar and Shuling. Do you have any more questions from the Ministry of Health colleagues? All right, Sandra, do you have any issues for discussion?
I might probably have something that, please let me know if it doesn't make any sense, but how about UDI and personalized medical device?
I can try and answer that question, Sandra. So UDI is an emerging context, concept in Australian context. We are still developing the UDI framework, but we believe that it certainly has a huge role to play in personalized medical devices. We have been having discussions with our UDI colleagues internally. How the concept could perhaps be used to include, let's say, some of the variation in patient-matched medical devices, the specified design envelope. The recent IMDRF document that was published for public consultation, that also mentions some UDI specific requirements for patient-matched medical devices, and specifically capturing the specified design envelope parameters and the limits within the device identifier part of the UDI. So, going back to your question, it's certainly an important integration between UDI and PMDs, and I think some of the challenges that we see with the PMDs, UDI will have a role to play to address those challenges.
Okay, similarly, locally, in Singapore context, the UDI is being phased in, and we are starting now with the higher risk class device for the UDI implementation. But with regards in specific to personalized medical device, I am not the expert in this field, but of my understanding, custom-made medical device may be exempted from UDI requirements. Okay, but for patient-matched medical device, I think this is something that I will still need to check back with my team. Yeah, if further inputs is required on this matter. Yeah.
Thank you. Probably we could benefit a lot out of learning how the regulators have had to evolve into making sure that these personalized devices that do not fulfill the traditional requirements for the approval of a medical device have been able to come up with ideas to manage them, to making sure that they are going to be safe for the patient. And in that regard, how because the experiences being developed for these particular type of devices, along with the experiences lived under the emergency situation to manage the pandemic, can be applied to regular medical devices, regular, quote unquote, regular way of doing things. Because I think there are great lessons that have been learned, great new ways of doing things that have been developed that might probably benefit the rest of the universe of medical devices.
That's a great question, Sandra. And personalized medical devices certainly present a whole new level of challenge for regulatory authorities, and particularly in the pre-market space. And the biggest challenge that we have seen in some of the initial applications that have come through is the heterogeneity in the device design itself. So we're talking about infinite permutations and combinations of devices that can be made within the specified design envelope, and how do we actually ensure that each of those designs would be safe and would perform as intended. So the heterogeneity in the device design itself is the biggest challenge. The second challenge that we've actually seen is, and we've documented that in the IMDRF N74 document as well, is that a lot of time these devices are being made using patient imaging data. And it is basically the raw material for the design of the device. The quality of the imaging data certainly has a bearing on the final product. So how good is the imaging data? That certainly affects the final device that is designed and produced. How old is the imaging data? That certainly has an effect, because our anatomy changes with time, and we can't use a CT scan that was done 5 years ago to develop a device for patients today. So that's certainly the other challenge that we've seen with these devices that rely on imaging data. The multiplicity of parameters within the specified design envelope when it comes to patient-matched medical device, that presents a unique challenge in terms of identifying where are the critical designs, which are the weak links and which are likely to fail. So it's that identification of worst case scenarios, that often is challenging for stakeholders, for manufacturers, and as well as for assessors to assess. So there's certainly those challenges. We of course take a risk-based approach in most of our assessment work. So we basically see the risk management documentation and see whether the manufacturer has identified all the risks associated with these devices, and what exactly have they done to address or mitigate or eliminate those risks, whether it is through testing, whether it is through improvement in designs, whether it is through proper instructions for use, usability assessments. So we look for all those pieces of evidence to do that risk-benefit analysis. And then, of course, there are challenges around clinical implementations as well. The claimed benefit with these devices are specifically around their ability to match the patient's anatomy. And if that match is not achieved during the clinical execution, then the theoretical benefits cannot be achieved. So there are challenges around clinical implementation of these devices as well. But coming back to your question, so I've only identified the challenges with these devices in my answer. But coming back to your question, it is often the risk-based approach that we take. We actually see if a manufacturer has a robust risk management plan in place, whether they have identified all the risks that we think exist for the device and the manufacturer thinks exist for the device, and whether sufficient measures have been taken to address or mitigate those risks.
Okay, I do agree with her that we face similar issues as TJ. I think one of the challenges will be the design envelope, there's a heterogeneity within the entire design envelope. So essentially, however, we still require the product owner to provide us with the information to ensure that it still conform to our essential principles for the safety and performance of the device. And this is also titrated against the risk-based approach for the device. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And do you see that post-market surveillance for PMDs might take a different approach as compared to batch-made MDs?
That's a great question. So sorry, Shilling, you go ahead.
Okay, so currently for us, the post-market approach for patient-matched medical devices is the same as the other mass-produced device, whereby we still adopt the same reporting requirements for the adverse events and field safety corrective actions. Yeah, that is for us locally. Sorry, Alpa, your turn.
Thank you, Shuling, and I agree with Shuling that post-market approaches for patient-matched medical devices aren't particularly different from other mass-produced medical devices. You know, one of the things that I think we have talked about in the IMDRF working group and has been mentioned in the document that has been published for public consultation is that the clinical evidence requirements for patient-matched medical devices specifically, you know, are the same as for mass-produced medical devices. But the additional component of complexity there is that you know, we don't have two devices that are exactly the same. So how do we conduct clinical trials, or how do we conduct clinical investigation on PMMDs when we know that no two devices in the trial are going to be the same? They are requirements for direct clinical evidence, but then where there's certainly you know, a place for post-market clinical follow-up for these devices to ensure that the ongoing acceptability of the benefit-risk equation with so many different parameters included in the device. Some of that data will emerge, and that will basically support or not support the ongoing acceptability of benefit-risk equation.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I've answered your question to the point, Sandra.
I mean, I think yes, you did, and I think I mean that we are still at a point that many things still have to be learned, and that the experience will let us know whether the approaches that are currently being taken are the appropriate ones, or if they're going to be required for some others to be considered. And I guess this is kind of like the new reality that we are living at, because I think PMDs, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, I mean, all these topics that are really brand new, that are really very fast evolving, are really posing a major challenge among regulators as to cope with those and to make sure that patients are going to continue to be safe, and that a new balance should be made, of course, under the risk-based approach, as not to prevent the evolution to happen at the speed that it needs to happen, and the safety of the patients at the end of the day.
Absolutely, absolutely correct. Just on that point of the post-market clinical follow-up and the post-market requirements for patient-matched medical devices, TGA last year published a guidance document on clinical evidence requirements for personalized medical devices, and within that guidance document, there are different ideas or different principles that are presented that the manufacturers or the stakeholders could benefit from in terms of gathering clinical evidence for these devices. And one of those elements is the element of post-market clinical follow-up, where in the pre-market space, manufacturer has clearly established that everything possible has been done, and post-market data will be linked to the report.
Thank you. Sorry, I do not want to monopolize the microphone, but these experiences that you are sharing about, how do they feed the work at the IMDRF on this topic?
Well, the IMDRF PMD working group, we have members from all jurisdictions who bring wide range of expertise and experience, and they are always willing to share their experience on these medical devices. And I think all of that experience certainly is very valuable in the technical recommendations that we develop for stakeholders. So the sort of applications that we are seeing here at PGA in the conformity assessment space, we certainly take some of those considerations to the IMDRF working group and express our concerns on some of the evidence that we are seeing from manufacturers and the need to provide very clear guidance and recommendations to all stakeholders. So the imaging consideration, for example, so that was debated quite a lot in the PMD working group, and the working group came up with very specific recommendations for manufacturers to follow when they are developing these devices based on patient imaging data. So, for example, how old the imaging data can possibly be for developing design of a patient-matched medical device, to establish very clear requirements for image acquisition, to have validated processes in place for processing the images acquired, to develop 3D models on which the implants would be based. So all of that discussion then leads to very specific technical requirements that provide great guidance to stakeholders, I guess.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
hopefully this is going to be my last one. Do you see a role for regulatory reliance in the PMD's world?
So I'm not able to fully understand the question, Sandra. Would you be able to elaborate a bit on that question, please?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, we are all aware that there are not sufficient resources at any given agency globally. So reliance is really probably the only way to move forward in many different areas. And I'm starting to think that for PMDs, it could be probably even a stronger challenge as compared to mass-produced medical devices. But I don't know, it is only my perception. Would you see a way for reliance to be applied also for PMDs?
So reliance on specifically what, Sandra?
On the decisions that are made as to, for PMDs as they are being granted by either Australia or Singapore. So for the patient match PMD.
Well, depending on which report you believe in, the market for personalized medical devices is certainly growing. Almost 2 decades ago, when the regulations on custom-made medical devices were introduced in Australia, there were only a handful of devices, custom-made devices, that were supplied to the patient. But now we certainly know that there are close to 50,000 stakeholders who are potentially impacted by the regulatory reforms that we have introduced here in Australia. So certainly the reliance, market reliance on these devices and patient reliance on these devices, it has increased over the last 2 decades, and it is likely to increase going forward as well. I think the biggest challenge for regulators going forward is to ensure that there are appropriate measures in place to ensure that the quality of these devices, the safety and efficacy is not compromised, and that is maintained, and the devices continue to meet the essential requirements for safety and performance. The other challenge that we certainly see with these devices is that the production of these devices is shifting closer to the point of care, where perhaps some of those manufacturing controls are sometimes not as advanced as they are at traditional manufacturing facilities, and how to actually ensure that that devices that are manufactured, in those scenarios are also fit for their purpose. So the number of personalized medical devices that people use, that is certainly going to increase going into the future, and it is going to present new challenges for us as as manufacturing technologies evolve, and as manufacturing shifts closer to the point of care.
I'm not sure if Sandra is referring to reliance of the other jurisdiction approval for the product registration submission, for instance, of patient matched medical device. Yeah, because, okay, so if you're referring to that context, maybe I would like to share some information. So for us locally, right, for instance, our bridge evaluation route, whereby we recognize approvals for the other reference agencies such as US FDA, EU, Australia TGA, Japan MHLW, and Health Canada. Personalized medical device is not excluded from that bridge evaluation route. So if it is a patient matched medical device and they have approvals in any one of those reference agencies and forms within the approvals which we accepted, then we will still consider the reference agency's approvals for the purpose of the bridge evaluation route, for instance. Yeah, hope that answers your questions.
Thank you very much. And sorry, I get inspiration based on the feedback that you're providing as to continue asking questions. So as you were mentioning, Upahar, I think a really great new challenge is going to be, how do we help stakeholders at the point of care to develop all the capacities and competencies that are required for, I mean, kind of like to perform manufacturing activities that were not traditionally in their scope, and they were not supposed, quote unquote, not supposed to be doing, but now they are. So how do you see that evolving, and how do you see, I mean, all relevant stakeholders helping them to develop those, or how do you see that evolving?
Oh, that's a great question, Sandra, and I think one that certainly keeps us awake at night here at TGA. It's an ongoing challenge. Having said that, the IMDRF has provided some guidance on that aspect, and particularly the N58 document talks about some considerations for point of care manufacturing. I also note that different jurisdictions have adopted different approaches to address point of care manufacturing of medical devices challenges. And these point of care manufacturing is not limited to personalized devices. It is basically across a wider range of medical devices. So coming back to the IMDRF recommendations on point of care manufacturing, so there are three very clear recommendations presented in the N58 document. The first recommendation is on manufacturing under special arrangements. where a regulatory authority could specify very clearly under what circumstances manufacturing at point of care is permissible and what are the regulatory obligations. The second consideration that the N58 document has presented is the concept of medical device production system, where manufacturers of medical devices or equipments could basically put together a package that includes raw materials, equipment, software, and operating instructions, and supply that their entire system to a healthcare facility under different models. So it could be supplied under, let's say, something called a build, own, operate model, where the MDPS manufacturer decides to install all the equipments and decides to maintain it and also operate it and produce medical devices and supply that to that particular healthcare facility. There are other supply models that are mentioned in the IMDRF N58 document, which is under consultation, which is under revision at the moment. The third concept that is presented in the IMDRF document is a fully regulated manufacturing, where if point of care manufacturing is happening, then it is treated no differently from a traditional manufacturing facility, and healthcare facilities required to have all sorts of arrangements in place, particularly around quality management system that a traditional manufacturing facility would have. So there are some ideas, preliminary ideas presented in the IMDRF document, but we're still to see how those ideas are implemented in different jurisdictions. Here in Australia, we are currently undertaking a project or specifically on point of care manufacturing of medical devices and discussing with different regulatory authorities, that includes APRA and Safety and Quality Commission Healthcare, TGA, to see what is the role of different regulatory agencies in any sort of manufacturing activity that happens at healthcare facility. So we are in that collaborative phase at the moment. We're trying to specifically address challenges around point of care manufacturing.
Thank you. I was promising
myself to stop asking questions, but again, I'm so sorry. I'm learning so much out of what we are discussing that they just keep popping up. With these efforts that are being performed as to define the what's in the house at the point of care are going to be the requirements, and that they have to be similar to the ones at the regular manufacturing side, as they are performing exactly the same type of activities. How are you assessing? I mean, what the impact of course, that I guess it's going to be like a quote unquote new regulation for the point of care in order to start. I mean, while being regulated as manufacturers, how do you foresee the regulatory impact assessment to end up being? Because it seems to be kind of like difficult to think that the cost of infrastructure to implement like a quality management system required at a manufacturing facility at a point of care will ever be paid off by the products that are going to be manufactured there. So I see also a challenge in that regard, to make it feasible or not.
I fully agree, Sandra, and that's the biggest challenge, because if the regulatory requirements are too onerous, then a lot of these point of care manufacturing facilities will simply shut operation, and sometimes that would be disadvantageous to patients, because they would lose access to some of these devices. I guess it is still under discussion. What exact approach different jurisdictions would end up taking, and there is a possibility that that IMDRF would look into this matter with greater interest and perhaps work on further guidance documents on point of care manufacturing of medical devices. Because we've realized that this is not limited to personalized medical devices, it is much bigger than that. Having said that, as I mentioned previously, there are different approaches adopted by different jurisdictions. So, for example, the MDCG in Europe, they've published an in-house manufacturing guidance document recently, where they have set very clear requirements for point of care manufacturing activities in healthcare facilities, where there's a need to identify a target population of patients for which those medical devices would be manufactured, and a clear justification why those needs for that target population couldn't be met otherwise. So that's one approach that has been adopted in Europe. I guess it also depends on the risk profile of the device. So if the risk profile of the device is fairly low, an appropriate quality management system, could be set up, and devices could be manufactured. But if the risk profile of the device is quite high and that requires specific expertise, for example, if you're talking about things like heart walls or orthopedic implants, where you require specific expertise in manufacturing and design and production to ensure that patient safety is not compromised. Perhaps stringent measures will need to be put in place to ensure that patient safety is not compromised. So it's a delicate balance at this stage, and I think it's a challenging space for regulators as well.
Thank you very much. And I guess we do not have additional questions, but just please let us know if there's anything else from our colleagues from the Ministry of Health in Indonesia. If there's anything else that they would like to ask. Otherwise, I think we could be getting into the end of the session today. I think it has been really very, very productive, very enlightening. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your knowledge. Congratulations for the great work that the agencies and the INDRF are undertaking. And I think I'll pass it to Mugan so we can get to the end of our session today. Thank you, Mugan.
Sure. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Upar and Shuling. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm not going to take too much time. So before we end off, one thing I do want to recall as well is the conformity assessment checklists that my colleague Marina introduced to the Ministry of Health colleagues yesterday. Just want to reiterate that we do want to get the Ministry of Health's feedback and initial reactions separately, and the MDRC team will be happy to follow up on that. And I hope the session today and yesterday was useful. We will circulate the presentation materials with the permission of the speakers and experts, if they're able to, and continue our engagement with the Ministry of Health separately. And colleagues, if you need to follow up on the presentations by TGA and HSA today, please get in touch. If you need Upar or Shuling's contact, Upar shared his email address with you. So let us know. We'll be able to follow up as well. So that is it from me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Mugan. Thank you, Sandra. And
Thank you.
thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Upar.
Thank you, Shuling. Bye.